let's actually start from the beginning. I know you grew up in a single parent household, and really by the time you were 13, you were hustling and had jobs at McDonald's and Domino's. And that's just so abnormal, right? Like kids who are 13, they're just thinking about school and playing. And that clearly wasn't the case for you. So I'm curious, where do you think that drive came from when you were younger and in your teen years?
Yeah, my first ever job was McDonald's. For me, so my parents separated when I was 11, and then my mom really was struggling on her own, and then she got into a really unhealthy relationship with what ended up being an abuser and con artist, and like every form of the word. And so he moved in with us 3 months after they met. And that was really kind of what flipped the switch for me to really feel like I needed to find my own independence, both financially. I and so I didn't have to find myself in a situation relying on someone else. And so that really sparked something within me. And that was when I went and got a job at McDonald's and then at Domino's. And from that point forward was really working full time between different jobs while I was growing up. So I had the drive. Really, it was from, being in the like flight or fight mode at that point, but I didn't have the confidence because at the same time, I loved candy, but it made me feel so insecure about myself, all the excess sugar, and really impacted my body image and self esteem. So I really didn't think I was capable of acting on an idea or that I really mattered in the world until many, many years later.
Yeah. And, it's so interesting. And I appreciate you just being so vulnerable about like those early days and what you witnessed with, your mother and what she was going through. And I'm always so curious, did you see her talk about money? Because, you're 13, like to really understand what was going on. I'm always so curious. And clearly that has really driven everything that you've done and the hard work you have. But was there conversations about money, or did you think to yourself, okay, if we have money, we have more freedom? Like what was kind of going on in your head? Because I love to kind of see that thread since I'm sure it's pushed you over the years too.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, like the big underscore in my life growing up, which was the biggest blessing, my Oma, my grandmother, who was my best friend in the world, she came here from Germany with nothing, met her husband. He worked on BC Ferries as an engineer, and then they saved up, bought a first tiny little house, sold that, got another one, and then ended up getting an apartment complex in Vancouver. And so she had really come to Canada with nothing and built a really strong foundation for herself. And she ended up supporting me in my childhood. And so I had the blessing, even though I was in a situation living at home where it felt very scarcity minded, I had the underpin of the blessing of my Oma supporting me. And so I was in a middle class neighborhood, in a middle class house. I even went to private school. My Oma supported that. And so it was kind of this funny dichotomy for me because would go to school every day around people and in an environment that was so different from what I was experiencing at home. So I had this like deep sense of gratitude, but also this awareness that like, oh my gosh, if my Oma had not been able to show up for me in this way, my life would look so different right now. And then I saw just emotionally with my mom going through divorce and then having to really start from zero, and then having being in an unhealthy relationship, and that how that impacted her self-worth and her meaning of how she felt about herself. And so all of that, it was partly money, but it was also, I think, me just running towards wanting to never have to rely on someone and build this like protective bubble at that time around me.
Yeah, no, and it's so interesting. Like you were saying, the dichotomy between going to the private school and the support, but then coming home into like different circumstances and similar, or not similarly different, but similar themes. My parents are divorced. And I feel like one thing that they both separately have like grilled in my head since I was younger was like, always be financially independent. And I'm like, for better or for worse, it's really driven me because you kind of see what something like that can do. I'm like, I could probably chill a little bit now, but
Sure.
it's like in your brain when you're so young. So I completely understand kind of like the situation you were in and the mindset. And what's so interesting, you mentioned when we first started that you had a lot of self doubt. You really struggled with your image and you were insecure at the time. And in college, I'm kind of fast forwarding a little bit. You actually took the leap and started your first business. And I'm just curious because typically, if you're feeling that way about yourself, you don't really have the courage to push through those fears and put yourself out there and make money. So, how did you really get over that? And I'm curious then to kind of dig in more into this business.
Yeah, absolutely. So, fast forward through my teen years, in university, I was applying for this job at this supplement store and had the fortune of meeting my boss, who became my boss at that supplement store. And she was like the first mentor in my life where she really like took me under her wing. I really felt like, wow, like this person sees something in me that I don't see in myself. And she taught me really that it's not about restricting yourself from enjoying the foods that you love. It's just about finding smarter choices that work for you. Um, and at the same time, through her, I began gaining confidence in myself by learning about different things at the gym and moving my body and just becoming more in tune with how do I feel when I eat this or when I eat this. And so for the first time in my life, I began having confidence in myself and my abilities, really by her mirroring back to me that she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And so that was when I went to university the following year and had my first idea that I felt, I don't know if this is going to work, but I have the confidence to try. And that was this business called Deckled Out. It were these vinyl and chalkboard, permanent, not permanent, semi-permanent for your walls so you could decorate while you're renting. Flopped in like 8 months. It flopped, but it was the biggest blessing because it gave me the golden nuggets that allowed me to act on my next idea.
Yeah. And I'd love to. I know in another podcast, you're like, it failed miserably, but it was my biggest blessing, like you said. So maybe what were some of those transformative lessons and blessings that you had from that first business, even if you only did it for 8 months?
Yeah, I think the biggest one was I was not sitting in, how can I create the most radical value for the consumer? I was thinking through the lens of, okay, from a product perspective, what do I want? And I wasn't actually validating, are these like creating the most value for consumers? And what are the common line patterns there of what's resonating with people?
Yeah. And I think with that first business, you put what, like $800? It was a really small amount. And I think the margins were pretty good. So like, did you realize this wasn't anything sustainable and that you were going to end it because there was just no market? Like, what was the moment where you're like, you know what? I got to just put this aside. Like, it's not worth my time.
Margins were amazing. It was really just that I wasn't getting meaningful traction. It was like it could have served as a lifestyle business for sure, but it wasn't going to be something that was going to really be able to scale. And so that's when I decided, this isn't something that I see myself wanting to run as a lifestyle business. And so then shut it down.
And I'm curious at that time, I mean, it's great that you mentioned you had a mentor at this supplement company that you worked with. It was the first person that really saw that sparkle in you. How did you know that starting that first business of yours, it was more of a lifestyle business and not one that's bigger? Like, how did you know to think even bigger? Because I think sometimes people don't know otherwise. They're like, oh, this is actually kind of good, or they just keep going. But I love that you were able to zoom out, think that way and pivot. Cause I even think it's so relevant to anyone kind of running a business. So how did you know at the time that there was more potential in your life?
Yeah, no, it's a good point for sure because it's like some people will keep trucking along.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I think really when I think back to that, I think what really allowed me to not be attached to continuing was just I didn't have that like visceral feeling that this like has to exist in the world. Like if this does not come to fruition in the world, then I will live with being 90 years old and wondering what if. I didn't have that visceral pull towards it. And so I think when it wasn't getting traction, and then I could notice within myself, like, I'm not going to bed obsessing over this. I'm not waking up obsessing over it. That's when I knew that it just wasn't going to be the thing.
That's so profound because I think you really need that. And we'll get into your story to like push through the hardest and darkest moments. If you don't have that passion and that thing that lights you up, it's going to be so difficult. So I'm so glad you shared that. And so I'm kind of, going back to this time, you closed down your business. It was summer before the third year of college. And I know that time period was actually quite a bit of a turning point. You shut down your business. You were always hustling with jobs. You had a job offer on your plate then as well. And then from my understanding, the idea for SmartSweets kind of came about. So can you kind of walk us through what was going on in that summer job or that summertime?
Yeah, come that summer, I had a job offer that had come through to me because I was an intern at the border, basically as border officer, doing admin. And I remember having a conversation with my Oma, and she was like, it's really good pay. I think it was like $18 an hour. It's super stable. It could turn into something more. And while I was kind of tinkering with that, at the same time in my mind, I had had a conversation with my grandmother a few weeks prior to that, where she had shared with me that she regretted having so much excess sugar because of how it impacted her throughout her life. So I had this moment that I'd really never had in my whole life where I was like truly just stumped, where like I guess I just thought adults go through their life and just like figure everything out and it's like rainbows and butterflies. I did not realize that you could go your whole life feeling bad about yourself because of what you're putting in your body. So, as I was getting that job offer, I was also going down the rabbit hole of excess sugar consumption and what it's doing to us as a society. They give like liquid sugar to rats and liquid cocaine, and the rats choose the sugar. And I was just so confused because I was like, cigarettes have warning labels, yet sugar is like intentionally put into these products through this thing called the bliss point, which is like the ideal amount of sugar, fat, and salt to make something as addicting as possible. And then they market it to kids and humans. So I was like so like gobsmacked by how this is even possible. And so that was happening. And then simultaneously, I was reflecting on that conversation, and candy was something that me and my Oma just loved and had such a shared passion and like emotional connection over. I was also going down the hole of like, well, I want to find candy that we can feel good about together. And was also shocked that I thought I was missing something when I was Googling. Like in today's world, this Chat GPT, which is a whole other blessing for founders, like
Yeah.
actually kind of insane. But at the time I was like, am I just doing bad research? Certainly this has to exist in the world. In every other grocery aisle in the grocery store at that point, sugar had been pretty radically innovated on.
Oh my gosh. And it's amazing how clear your vision was. It seemed like you were just listening to other interviews, you were so confident. It felt like early on in this vision. Is that accurate? Like once it kind of hit you?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as I put that puzzle piece of the sugar and excess sugar consumption and low sugar candy not existing together, like immediately it was like a visceral pull where I felt like called beyond something that I could logically explain to act on this with everything that I had.
And during that, I love that you said that because I had a similar feeling also when I came up with the idea of my business. But at that time, were you thinking about what would my next business be? Or were you truly considering this job and it just kind of hit you when you were talking to your grandmother?
Yeah, it's so funny because I feel like when people are ideating and some like wanting to start something, sometimes I feel like we think so hard about it, and it's like we almost want to like make it happen, but it's so hard because it's like the universe, I truly feel like it all is unfolding how it's meant to. And at that time I was truly considering this job. I wasn't sitting down and being like, what's the next thing? It just really had this like crazy, just like serendipitous flow to how that unfolded.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And so you're feeling this way. And, you mentioned your grandmother never had the opportunities that you did, right? She came here, built a life for herself. And, this job, which from her perspective is like, this is safe, this is
Right.
stable, you're making money. Like, what are you doing? So how did you really think through or explain to her that you also dropped out of college? Like you did a lot of shifts during this time. So what was her reaction, and how did you not allow anyone's opinions really drive this next phase of your life?
I think she was like, "Are you crazy? You're throwing your life away." Because it's true what you said. It's like my Oma and that generation, it's like to have the opportunity to go to university in Canada, that truly was like such a gift. Like she didn't get to complete school past grade 2. And so just like the gift of being able to go to university was so special and so lucky that to throw that away to go recipe test in your kitchen, she truly thought I was just going unhinged. And I think for me, I always felt like such a deep sense of gratitude to my Oma and just a deep sense of wanting to do right by her. And I just had this feeling in my gut that, like she will see it one day, like she will see it one day. And so just honoring my inner voice, I think, knowing that at the end of the day, that is what would make her most proud at some point in time, what was allowed me to do that.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I feel like, how old were you at the time?
I
20?
was 21, turning 22 that year. Yeah.
Yeah, like so young. I mean, I didn't even start listening to my gut until I was like 29, 30. And I'm like, wait, I've been doing it all wrong. It's time to just go. So I love how because I always felt that, but I never made action. Like I've been wanting to start a business since I was a kid running around, but I love how you have honored how you felt. And again, you were excited about this idea that there was no world where you wouldn't even want to take that step, which I think is like a beautiful way to start a business. And so you don't have like a food science background. You have no experience creating, this kind of candy. Where did you start? What did it look like in the early days? And did that ever, I know this is a bigger question, but like, did that ever give you any fears around starting, or you're like, I'm going to just figure this out?
I think the one thing that I think is such a gift, and there's like such a cheesy but true quote, I think it's from Oprah actually, where she says, like, it's not that most people in the world can't get to where they want to go, it's just that they don't know where they're going. And the one gift that I had was that I had such clarity of vision of where I wanted to go. And so it allowed me to make that real to myself when it was like my four walls in a basement suite to the rest of the world. That, my idea and my vision that SmartSweets was going to be the global leader in revolutionizing candy, and we were going to move the needle in the global sugar reduction movement. And that became so real to me, just like visualizing that every single day. It felt like it had already happened in the future, and I was just reverse executing on it. And so, like, in my cells, like in my body, it felt so real that to me, like, I truly felt like there's no 0% chance this is not happening. So that gave the context for, like not having any food science background, not having any friends and knowing anyone that's ever started a company or in the business world. It all just contextualized down to, like, at the end of the day, no problem, because I'll figure it out because this is going to happen.
Wow, that is beautiful. I have goosebumps with you just saying that, is how you knew exactly where you were going. You were visualizing that every day, that you're like, I'm going to make it happen. Like it's already happened in your story. Like you said, you're going backwards into that to bring it to life. And I know, in the early days, or, when you were just experimenting, like you said, in your basement, in your kitchen, I think you bought, what was it, like a molding from Amazon? Like, what did it look like? Like, I'm sure that feels like a long time ago, but I just want to talk about it because sometimes a lot of people starting businesses overthink the beginnings, and it's like, you can just start. Of course, every business is different. You're not starting like a hardware company, but I love the scrappiness. So maybe you can kind of walk through that aspect.
For sure. No, to your point, like so much of it is just showing up and putting one foot in front of the other and walking into that fear and walking into the dark abyss of the unknown, trusting that you will figure it out. And in those early days, I had like candy is a very high cook temp. And so I had candy thermometers, I had the molds, I had all the ingredients. And the cook temp was so high that smoke would go out my window. I'm pretty sure my landlords, like, they thought I was doing like illicit activities for sure. But like the equal amount of time in my day that summer, I really spent working on my mind because I woke up with such like paralyzing fear every day. And my head was just like a battlefield working against me, being like, who are you to do this? You don't know enough. You don't matter. All of the things that would keep me paralyzed from taking a foot forward in front of the other every day. So, putting up the cheesy quotes, listening to the motivational tracks. I would be like reading books and ripping out the pages and framing them, like anything that I could do to just help myself actually genuinely believe that I was capable as a human.
Gosh, I love everything about what you said. I feel like, no matter what part of entrepreneurship you're in, I'm curious to get your thoughts, but like the mind is always a battle. Like even 4 years in for me, it's like when we're in another stage of the business, I'm like, oh, here goes my crazy thoughts or that the unknown, the dark abyss. Like literally what you're saying is just so relatable. It's like, all right, we hit the next milestone, but like what's next? And do I know what to do? And am I the right person? Like those will never stop. But I love that that was your focus so early on, because I agree. I don't think it's talent. I don't think it's experience. I think it's people who have the courage to show up and do things day over day over day. Like, I know I'm going off on a tangent, but some people like keep their idea to themselves when they're starting. And I'm like, that is like 10% of it. I'm like showing up every single day when you don't want to, or you don't feel good, or you have a rejection. I'm like, that mindset piece I think is so key. So I love that you mentioned that was really a focus for you. And I'm just curious, you mentioned a few things that you did. So you put like quotes on the wall, you listen to podcasts. Are there any books that you still kind of recommend during that time? Because I would love for just anyone listening to like dive into anything that you thought was helpful.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. That's so well said. It's like the whole thing of like an idea is just an idea without execution. It's like the showing up with like your bullhorns on, just like pushing down that door and like rolling the ball up the mountain every single day. And there was like, yeah, to your point of books, there was two incredible books that like really changed the path of my journey. One in particular that like really I clung on to like every single day. I hate the title because it's so cheesy, but it was such a transformative book for me. It was called How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis. Yeah, and the like
British guy, right?
yeah,
Like media guy. Okay.
yeah, yeah, that one. And like the whole book is really just about exactly what you said, that it was like it's actually not that hard to get where you're going when it comes down to it. If you think of the amount of people actually working on the same vision of you as you, and then the amount of people that actually are willing to have the grit, the perseverance to do what you said, show up every day and just sit in the shit of it all, and keep waking up every single day, going at it with full energy and a grateful heart. And there was like one quote in particular. I'm not quoting it like totally accurate, but it was like the quote that I literally clung to every single day. It was the essence was like, stick with me, young brother, sister, because you're suffering from nothing more than fear and lack of experience, two conditions that will pass with time and whose passing can be expedited through fierce determination and application. So it really normalized for me, like the thought, it validated that like, oh, I can do this. Like as long as I keep showing up and keep working through the fear and working like outwork like working harder than my counterparts that may be working on the vision, who I don't know exist in the world, are this is going to happen.
It's funny about that book. My husband actually listened to the audiobook maybe like last year, and he's like, you got to read it. So I went through the audiobook, but I'm going to buy the printed version because I love the fact that you mentioned you would keep referring back to it. So I think I could even reread it again and really like go through his principles. But I did enjoy it. And what's so interesting also is that from that book and just your experience, it seems like you weren't nervous of fear. It was like, oh, this is part of the process. And if I move through it and I work hard, we can go on, get to the other side. And I think even doing this podcast now for 4 years, I've interviewed, I don't know, over 200 women founders. Every time I hit a problem, I'm like, oh, this person went through something similar and this is part of it. Like business is problems. If you don't have problems, it's like you're not growing. So
Totally.
I keep reminding, I forget that sometimes. I'm like, oh, why do we have to go through this? And I'm like, no, this is part of, this is what I get to do. This is what it is being a founder and CEO. So I think that perspective change actually has helped me a lot through hard moments, because it's like, it shouldn't be otherwise. Like this is the journey.
Totally. I think what you said is so powerful. Like having that mindset of I get to do this instead of I have to do this. I think also in those hard times, sometimes people get stuck in feeling bad for themselves and I think there's such danger in that, because at the end of the day, exactly what you said, like it is such a gift, and you like have to be able to peel back the layers to think about your why and to peel yourself out of the hole. I know like for me, every single night I would just like stare at the roof and I would just be like, I've given it literally every single ounce of my being today, and now I'm just gonna like let the universe do what it's supposed to. And it always does. And like in those hardest moments, hindsight always is the greatest gift of like, all challenges or opportunities hidden in disguise. But it can be so hard to see that when you're just like in the thick of the hardness.
I love just how spiritual you are. It's like you would look, I love that you just kind of let go, because there is an element of working hard and surrendering to like what's next. And there's like a higher being that's kind of guiding you. It sounds so woo woo, but I totally,
Not
I'm like,
woo at
love
all.
this. Yeah,
We're on a spinning rock, so
that's true.
anyone who's like, it was like, oh, serendipity is woo woo, or like I'm like, well, consider we're on a spinning rock and then explain that to me and how that's not woo woo, if anything.
Oh my God. I love that. That's so true. I never thought about it like that. But so let's go into one of the bigger challenges that you hit pretty early on. So, you came up with this formula finally, like the recipe, dabbling, doing so many iterations. And the next step was finding a manufacturer. So maybe can you walk us through, as a young woman trying to break an industry, how you found that first manufacturer and the horrible story that kind of happened with them as well?
Yeah. So I think, for me, like the gift of my whole life, I felt like I wasn't taken seriously. I think a lot of entrepreneurs feel this way, that like I just didn't feel understood as a human. I was always kind of written off as that person who's not going anywhere in life, or that you just shouldn't take seriously. And so by the time I acted on SmartSweets idea, I already kind of had the like subconscious understanding that like I need to like not take no's or what anyone thinks of me as anything that actually means anything about myself. And that was a big, big blessing. As soon as I got out of my kitchen, I had the blessing to be accepted into this accelerator program, which was primarily tech companies. But I was like, you know what? Like, you don't know unless you try. And so I'm going to try. Thought I wouldn't get in and did, which was the biggest blessing, because overnight I was able to work out of an office with other young entrepreneurs also working on ideas. And that allowed me to like really change my mindset as well, from a confidence perspective, where I would cry one day and then I'd see someone else crying and be like, okay, cool. So like everyone cries on this journey, like that's fine. Instead of making it mean something about me or how I wasn't capable. When it came to finding a manufacturer, the thing about candy is that like 99% of candy is sugar. So it was kind of funny to a lot of manufacturers that you would consider making it without sugar, because then it's like, well, how do you make the candy? Like, what's even in it? And so there was one manufacturer that was willing to take a chance on me. And so we got together. I brought the benchtop sample to them. We worked on it to make it viable for full scale manufacturing. I was meant to launch January of 2016. And come December, when the run was supposed to happen, they let me know, hey, we're going to do the run, but we're going to switch out this one ingredient to chicory root fiber. And right away, I knew, I was like, oh, if they did that, the formula would not be tolerable from a stomach perspective. I intentionally didn't use sugar alcohols because sugar alcohols and candy are disastrous for your gut and all the things it does. And so right away, I knew what they were telling me basically is that we're making a recipe for you that's going to blow up people's stomachs. And so I was like, okay, great. And I also know they're taking that recipe for themselves. And so it was like a couple of days before Christmas. I was like, shoot, I'm going to have to try and get investors now because the only other manufacturer that I was able to find after that, their minimums were too high. So I was cold LinkedIning investors just before Christmas, and a few replied, which was like so gracious, but nobody wanted to try the product because the company's name was Stevie Sweets. And at the time, stevia had a negative connotation. So I sat with that, and that was one of those moments, which was a great example of like I was in the pit of despair, just being like, I have no money. This is still basically an idea in my head. This other manufacturer who has retail distribution and their own manufacturing facility is now taking my freaking recipe and running with it. And I just was so in the pit of despair where I know every entrepreneur feels this, especially in so many moments in those early days where like you truly just feel like, how am I going to make this happen? And so I sat back and I was like, well, interesting. Maybe I should change the name. And so that's how it evolved from Stevie Sweets to SmartSweets. So that was like a great example of, opportunity hidden in disguise, because had I not changed the company's name, I truly don't think the product and brand would have resonated the way it did.
Yeah, and SmartSweets is such an amazing name, and I can't believe that you're dealing with all this during the holidays. And you message a few investors. Did you get anybody to? Did you raise that money and kind of secure that larger manufacturer that you came across?
No, I didn't. So I wasn't able to get any investors. So I turned to debt financing. So I was able to get 105K debt financing, and that was what allowed me to end up carrying out the initial run and launching.
And I think from another interview, was it like you had to back it with an asset, like your car? Like you were young, right? Like how did you even get around to getting a loan?
It was partially finding two different banks and then kind of projecting a bit of confidence. And then, so I would go to the one bank, Bend City is what it was called. It's a credit union here. And I would say, hey, I'm talking to BDC and Futurepreneur. I think they're going to give me a loan. And they were like, okay. Went to BTC and Future. Hey, I think I'm talking to Van City. Like they're also going to give me a loan. And then I had a Honda Fit that was like worth like $8,000 or something. And so I had to leverage that. And then I also had to get life insurance. And I remember that call so vividly where they were like, do you have any ailments on your pinky toe, on your toe? Have you have family? And I was like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I feel like if this doesn't work out, I'm all in, quite literally and
Oh,
figuratively.
sure. Oh, gosh. Oh my gosh. And it's interesting because sometimes people think maybe investors, that's the only route, but I love how ended up doing debt financing. You were able to get that manufacturer. And I'm curious, from that situation with that first manufacturer, kind of taking your recipe, are there any learnings that you implemented after that just to make sure you're not in that position in the future? Like anything come out from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest lesson, and it ended up being super a valuable one in building the back end of the business, like really building kind of like a moat around your innovation. And what I mean by that is like not having anybody having full disclosure of how the product's made. So if you use a co-man, like white labeling and shipping them your flavor, or owning your own molds, just things that just no one has the full picture of the puzzle other than you. That was in those early days what I didn't do.
I see. Yeah, I was like, how do you even get around that? Because when you have a co-packer or co-manufacturer, you're just happy that like, you're like, someone's giving me a shot and they're creating the product. And I'm like, but how do you get around from not sharing all the details because they're making it? But that's great advice. Like, there's different levers you can pull to kind of give them without sharing the whole picture. So
For
that's
sure.
that's really good to hear. So you're dealing with all this manufacturing issues. You secure one. I'm sure simultaneously you're also thinking about how am I going to sell the X amount of units? And now even with this bigger manufacturer, your life is on the line with this life insurance. Your debt is to the name. Like, how were you thinking about selling all the products that you were manufacturing?
Yeah, it's so funny because I remember specifically on the day that we launched, I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, up until now, I've just been working to get it to launch, but now I need to pray that people are actually going to buy it. Like, I don't know if you have this way, the podcast.
Yes, 100%.
Oh shoot, now people actually
Yeah.
I need them to listen to it. It was this moment where I was like, oh my gosh, now people need to actually buy it. And so I got my initial retailers really just from like the classic, just like beating down the door. I think like I made 50 or 60 calls before I got a call back from different local chains here. But I also had this hypothesis, and I thought, if we are able to launch nationally from day one with the power of social media these days, that will actually be a lot more powerful and less frustrating for consumers than if we launch in our back door and kind of scale regionally. And that was like a very controversial way to launch a food business, especially at that time, because it was very traditionally you start regionally and then you scale into national. And so I focused on finding a national retail partner and ended up launching with Popeye supplements, it's called here in Canada, as well as Bed Bath Beyond.
Amazing. And getting in those two retailers nationally, that was just pure cold email. Like, how did you get in front of them at the time?
Honestly, those were like great examples of serendipity where I truly believe this, and at every part in the journey when I just felt like I was hitting a wall and truly putting my heart and soul into banging the door down, right around the corner, there was always a sprinkle of serendipity. So basically, Popeyes happened because I was at my first trade show, and just by happenstance, their booth was right across from mine. And so that was how I got the contact to get the ball rolling. Bed Bath Beyond was just another serendipitous thing. I had met this fellow, and just by chance, he knew the Bed Bath Beyond buyer and was so gracious to be like, do you want me to take you to their head office and intro you to Greg, was his name. So two kind of things that, like, again, you couldn't explain it, but it was very serendipitous.
Yeah. And it seems like the serendipity that came, you were still putting yourself out there, meeting different people, connecting, right? And like, it seems like that is kind of how the dots worked out and you were able to get in front of like these right retailers. So I love that. And then it shortly after, I know you ended up going also on Dragon's Den, which for anyone who doesn't know, it's essentially like the Shark Tank of Canada, which I'm sure was so fun because you grew up also watching it. Like I'm obsessed with Shark Tank still to this day. I love to watch it. But what was that process like? And how did that really impact the trajectory of your business?
Yeah, totally. Like you said, I know I like grew up watching Dragon's Den too. It was like your version of Shark Tank, and Shark Tank I'd watched too. We have that in Canada, but it was like my escape from, I remember when I would get home from like my full-time jobs. It was just so fascinating to me to see these people that had the confidence in themselves. I was so bewildered that people have the confidence in themselves to have the courage to act on an idea. It was so like wildly inspiring to me. So it sounds like you as well when you were growing up. And so I would always write down ideas like on notepad. I remember I had this idea when I was like 13 for like stevia sweetened tea. So
Wow.
like I like would write things down, but never in a million years would think I was capable, or never in a million years think I'd actually be on that show that I was watching. So had the opportunity to go on Dragon's Den, and I had honestly just blacked out. Like I remember coming off and being like, oh my gosh, that must have been gone really bad because it was so short. And they were like, no, you were in there for like 40 minutes or whatever. And it was great brand awareness. And it was also really great for the business as well, having the feedback from the Dragons, and which validated some things that I wanted to evolve around the product. And it was validating too that they again like reflected back to me believing in myself and just giving yourself kudos for like, no, like I have been executing in a really meaningful way. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's so interesting being sometimes you're just in do mode and operations mode that you don't realize everything you're doing, like how amazing it is. So I'm sure, right? You're up there sharing the business and you're just in the thick of it and people are reflecting back on you like, wow, Tara, like this is amazing. And like all, just giving you so many compliments. Cause I think sometimes you don't realize like what you're building because you're just in like trying to just keep it up day to day. So I could imagine that was like a big opportunity. And I know from my understanding, they all gave you a deal and you went with one, but then you decided not to do it. Is that what happened?
Yeah, no, exactly what you're saying. I think especially as women, we're the first to just like we don't sit enough in ourselves and like give ourselves kudos and be like, no, I am amazing. And when we do that, then society reflects back on us that we're being egotistical or that we should be more humble or like there's so many layers I feel like that impact especially women founders on that. Yeah, so with Dragon's Den ended up getting an offer from all the dragons and then accepted one, and then at the end of the day off air we didn't end up finalizing it, but it truly was such a blessing that allowed, although I'm the first to say I don't think anything is a silver bullet. I think everything is kind of cumulative, but it was definitely one of those moments that expedited the growth of SmartSweets for sure.
I see. Was that one of the first moments where you were like, oh, this is going to be big? Was that one of the first inflection points, or did you see that before? And this was maybe the second one after going national?
I always, it was like from day one, I knew in my mind it was going to be what it was going to be. And I never had a moment where I needed that validated, but it was one of those key moments that reflecting back to myself, I was like, oh, I am executing well. And like, I am the person that's capable to be spearheading this.
And you don't have to go into like all the details of this, but for anyone listening, like the fact that you didn't end up doing the deal, are there certain things when because you ended up raising money, in the future, what are some things that were important to you? Like what maybe killed the deal, or what are some things you're like, this is non-negotiable, bringing an investor in?
Yeah, for sure. At the time, after the deal, when I had gone and pitched and had done it, I was so at that point I was primarily scaling the company through debt financing, and so I would treat the bank like I would an investor. So I would meet with them quarterly, share an update, make sure that they were really bought into the vision and understood where we were going. And so shortly after the show, it just happened that I was able to access more debt financing. And so I was able to delay taking on capital. And I really, really, when I was building SmartSweets, it was in an era where raising was so celebrated as a milestone in itself and not as a means to your milestones that I really wanted to delay taking on capital as long as I could from a cap table perspective.
And it's so interesting and it's so wise that you knew that, because you're right. During that time, I was like, raising money was like, great job. It was like, who cares how your business is doing? If you raise money, that's like a sign of approval. They could not be profitable. And I worked for one of those startups. And I remember my dad was asking, like, they've raised that much and you guys aren't making money? Like, what world is this? And I was like, that's how it is. And you were also in a tech incubator. So I would imagine that that was normal, but how did you know not to go down that route? Did you just know intuitively that wasn't the right move for you?
No, I think it was exactly like I just saw all these companies raising and then also some massive like epic fails happening. I think at the time like Juicero had just, and I think like Theranos with like I was just seeing these stories and I was just like realizing that like it's like what is the point of raising if you're not actually getting to the vision that you have set out on. And then also I was realizing that, if you raise, then that drastically changes how you have to go about growing your company. All of a sudden, you are in a pressure cooker if you're going the route of VC or PE early on, where you have expectations that need to be met. And if they're not met, that's going to have implications. And I wanted to be able to cowboy it and follow my gut, and my intuition, and not have some of those, what felt like kind of more like red tapes earlier on. So that was why when I did raise, I wanted to go the route of angels.
I see. Okay. I love that you said cowboy. I have the same mentality around everything that you said. So I love it. And I know, there's so much more to talk about. We're coming up on time, but I want to also talk about, after being on Dragon's Den, you then get an email from Whole Foods. I just love this story. So maybe you can kind of share, because that's another serendipitous, incredible moment that I think was also an inflection point for you guys.
Yeah, totally. It totally was. Serendipity like became like a word that was like used daily in the office. The so with Whole Foods, and I love what you said too about, it's like, I think why serendipity gets the foo-foo thing is because it's like, because people expect like you can just manifest or think it into existence, and like, you're right, that's foo-foo, but it's like matching it with the hard work and showing up and giving it all you got, and then the serendipity does happen. And this was an example of that, where super randomly Fox Business, we were super super small, reached out and was like, hey, would you like to come to New York? We'd love to do a feature on SmartSweets. So I did, the classic thing where it's like, yeah, I'm going to be in New York next week, like play it cool. And then they aired that. And 3 minutes after, I got an email from the global buyer at Whole Foods saying, hey, would you be interested in a global launch? And I remember sending it to my first and only squad member at the time and was like, haha, this is a scam, but wouldn't that be so amazing if it was true? And it was true. And the 10 months later, we did launch globally with Whole Foods. But it was just one of those moments where the buyer said to me after the fact, I hate Fox News. I don't watch it. I was just scrolling through it, like in that moment in time, in that 3-minute segment that aired.
Wow. I mean, and you also have just an incredible product as well. And so I'm sure it caught this person's attention, but I love it. It's so funny. I haven't had that kind of an email, but once we had a celebrity email us and it went to spam, and I was like, dude, this is fake for sure. But I still responded. Like, we found it in spam, and and I was like, oh my gosh, is this actually the person? So I can't imagine getting like, that was a small moment, but I can't imagine getting an email to like from Whole Foods to partner with them globally. You said like, that's like a big opportunity to expand in the US, because I don't think you guys were in the US at the time, right?
Yeah.
Wow. And you said that you ended up launching, was you said in 6 months from then, or
It was like 10 months later. Yeah.
10
Yeah.
months? And tell me more, because it seems like manufacturing, there's always some kind of issue. Like, you clearly had that one manufacturer that was working for you. How did you secure another one? Like, what did that look like at the time, and maybe some of the challenges to find someone to scale with you?
Yeah, I feel like being a founder, it's such a fine line, because you have to constantly be projecting confidence when you have no idea if something is possible yourself, and it's such a fine line between like agreeing to something that just is not able to happen at all within that time period, or agreeing to something that doesn't seem possible, but like if you run like hell and give it all you got, you can make shit happen. And so that was an instance where when I said yes to the global launch, the original manufacturer, shady stuff was starting to happen. People are finding metal pieces in their candy bags. The manufacturer wore a GoPro into our packaging facility, and it was just like crazy stuff was happening. So we knew that partner was not going to be this one to scale with. But with the Whole Foods, we knew now we had this pressure cooker timeline to find a new partner with. We ended up finding one only because I found this manufacturer, and I just decided, I'm just going to start showing up in person to these manufacturers.
Sure.
And this one manufacturer was run by the family, the dad and son just happened to be there. And it was just really serendipitous. And then we were shipped the product. It was like 3 days before the deadline to UNFI or something. It was like sitting on the edge of our seat, because the December when we were supposed to ship it, all the product was melting off the bags from the machine and everything. It was all going to shit, as it usually does.
Always. But that's scary right before they're about to ship it. So how did they fix that?
It was like one of those just like in the moment things that we had to solve that like it could have gone either way. And thankfully it went the right way and we could ship the product, but it was tight.
Oh my goodness. And I love that you're sharing all these experiences because even when I was creating my product and it's like a food product, I was like, oh, there's always some issue, especially early on. So like hearing that, I'm like, oh, for anyone listening who might be in that position, like shit happens. I mean, even at your level, and that's like scaling to all of Whole Foods. I mean, I can't imagine everything that you were kind of feeling then, but so glad that it ended up working out. And I love how you would just fly in and show up. You said with no appointment, you would just go to these manufacturers. Is that what you were doing?
Yeah, like just calling the day of, being like, "Hey, I'm nearby. Can I stop by?" Like I would always focus on the like what's in it for them, you know. And so I wouldn't show up and just talk about myself and my vision, and I would always go with like such clarity on like, okay, what's in it for them? Like, how am I creating value for them to say yes? And I think they saw that, and they saw. I think there's such power when someone shows up with a level of conviction about something. You like have this gut thing where it's like, holy smokes, this person's gonna do it. Like this person's doing the thing. And so that was immensely powerful in getting them on board to take a chance.
I love that. I love that you're thinking about adding value to them. I think like in any aspect of business, that's always good to think like, what is this person, like why should they listen to me, how can I add value? Even like selling your products, every piece of content I'm doing, I'm like, how can I add value to whoever's taking the moment to like listen to this, like reel or whatever the case is. But I love that you were thinking about that with the vendor and across the board in all aspects of your life. And I know I'm going to fast forward a little bit, but just putting in some stats, within 4 years of this whole story we're going through, SmartSweets grew to over 100 million, and then you decided to sell a majority stake for over 300 million when you were, I believe, 26. And I have so many questions, but one of them is, because I have so many friends who have businesses, and I always ask them like, do you want to sell, or why did you decline, or why did you accept? So how did you know that was the right moment? Was it more of a business decision or personal decision? It's a big decision, so I'd love to hear what was going on in your mind at that time.
I know there's no right or wrong way. I think for me, from day one of SmartSweets, I always knew in my mind, at some point I want to partner with a multinational and we can tap into their manufacturing and distribution systems and expedite the vision. Because I was never attached to the how, but I was attached to the vision. And also, I also was very clear, like I feel so grateful for the opportunity to act on this idea. Like, how did I get so lucky? And I cannot show up like this, time and energy wise, for the rest of my life like this. So, knowing that at some point, life wasn't going to look like this forever in terms of the sacrifices that I made in order to show up for the vision and our team each and every day, which I did with like such a grateful heart. Um, I knew from day one, and then fast forward to year 4, we were like going around the bend of like the next stage in growth. And it was the first time I like didn't have a gut feeling on what laid around the bend. So I really felt like, whether a partnership happens or not, a new CEO where I can lean into where I serve best on the mission makes sense. And then my Oma was also starting to get older and go into her own end of life years, and I really wanted to show up for her in the same way she had showed up for me my whole life. Otherwise, like, what's the point of it all other than obviously the amazing impact you're making in the world? But I really wanted to show up for her, and so that was what informed from like a timing perspective, finding a partner.
And I have so many questions there, but one of them, I love what you said, is like, you thought this is very rare that you would be okay stepping down as CEO, because I've talked to a lot of people and it's like always an ego thing. Like, should I stay as a CEO? But it seems like you knew bringing in someone at that scale would be better for the business as a whole. Is that just what gave you the confidence to be like, you know what, I'm okay, whether it's selling the business or putting someone else as a leader? Like, it's such a rare thing to hear, I think, from founders and CEOs.
Yeah, like for me, For me, like I really viewed it from day one of like how can I best serve the mission and how may I be holding us up. So, in the beginning it's sweeping the floors, wearing all the hats, but when you filter it through like how may I be holding the company up, that was really helpful to me because your baby is the vision coming to life. And so if you're going to get in the way of that in because of the role that you're in or for whatever reason, it was never about that for me.
And I just also want to highlight like the amount of sacrifice that you put like within 4 years. I mean, I'm sure there's so much that you didn't do as an early 20s, mid 20s woman, like being with your friends or whatnot. Like your life was fully SmartSweets. And maybe we can end on this question, although I feel like I can talk to you for so long. But through all of that, you mentioned you were working all the time. Just given the level of scale, I can't imagine even taking breaks during that just to kind of support all of that. Did you ever feel, were you burnt out? Like when you kind of paused and you sold the business? I don't know how quickly your operational roles shifted, but were you burnt out during it? Like it seems like your mental health was like you really fostered that you're okay. But reflecting back on that wild roller coaster of a journey, like how did you feel during all that? I know that was like a really roundabout question, but
No, I hear you. By year 4, like my adrenals and my nervous system was just totally shot. I mean, like we talked about in the beginning, I think it sounds like for the both of us, like partly what served me in my childhood was operating in like fight or flight mode. And I was operating in that way, and it served me to allow me to scale the business at such a rapid pace, but it wasn't serving me any longer as a human that's just like thriving in the world. So my adrenals were definitely shot. I remember I would have like 7 coffees and feel nothing. I was, though at the same time, like the underpin, I just had such gratitude. And I think like being able to pull myself back to a place of gratitude is what kept me going. But it was not a sustainable way to work. And there are many things that if I ever built again, I knew that, I could be more efficient in, that would serve my mental health and allow me to be more productive versus just hours and time in.
yeah. And I feel like when you're first starting your own business, you don't know otherwise and you're just trying to get everything off the ground. But I'm like, man, I can't wait in the future or in my 40s, 50s, like the second business or whenever that is. I'm like, you would just do things so differently. But it's like you have to go through that journey and build that confidence, improve yourself to think about different ways. So I love all that. Oh my gosh, Tara, this was such a blast. I feel like we got to do a part 2 to go into so many other things, but so appreciate you joining. Big, very much inspired by your mentality, how you build, what you've built. And this was just so much fun. Thank you for joining us.
Ditto. Thank you so much, Jasmine. I'm so inspired by your journey and just like so cool that you started this really from like a heart whisper that you had and the impact that it's had, and what it's grown into. So yeah, mutually inspired.
Oh my gosh, you're the best.